Hey guys, Jason here. So today I'm going to go over another JavaScript method. This one will be about reduce. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to uh, just explain how reduce works really quick, and then I will show you a diagram of how our example is going to work, our code example, and then from there I'll go into actually implementing our code example. So hopefully, breaking all that down, you'll get a good understanding of how reduce works. So what reduce does, it's basically, well, yeah, it's an array method, and it basically returns a single value. So you could re it could return an array, it could return a string, a number, any of those things. Um, so you can have, let's say, an array of objects, and you can use reduce on that array, and you can basically reduce it down to a single value. So you can reduce it down to like maybe just a string if you want, you know, something like that. But in our example, we're gonna do this. We're gonna take the sum of an array of numbers. Excuse me. So we're gonna pretty much take an array of numbers, call the reduce method on it, and reduce it down to a single value, which will be the sum of the whole array. So let's go into this example. So I created a variable called sum, which will be our value, our single value that we're going to get, which is going to be the sum of this array of numbers. So what we're doing is we're taking our numbers array, calling reduce on it, and reduce takes two arguments. It takes a callback function, which is the function that will be called on every element in our array, and it also takes an initial value. So first let's finish up our callback function. So the callback function will have two parameters. The first one we'll call it the accumulator, and then the second one we'll call it item. Well, we'll call it current item. All right. And um, so what do these parameters, what are these parameters referring to? So the second argument we have here, which is our initial value, is 0. So what our accumulator will be equal to in our first iteration will be this initial value. So 0 will be equal to the accumulator, and what our current item will be the first item in our array for our first iteration. And so to get the sum, we want to do return accumulator plus current item. All right. So this is basically going to give us the result we want. But let's go into a diagram I made so we can really see what's happening. So, okay. So here's a diagram I made. Hopefully this will help you understand what's going on. We have our array, which is our array of numbers here. And I just created a little function definition here, which is our callback function definition. All it does is it takes the accumulator and current item and adds them together and returns that value. And so our initial value, as we defined earlier, was 0. So for our first iteration, what's going to happen is we're going to have 0, and that value will be passed into our first iteration of our callback function. So it's going to take, so what it does is it returns 0, which is what we got from our initial value here. And also, yeah, so that's what we do. So we have 0 plus our current item, which is 1. And so what does that return? That returns 1. So now 1 will be passed into our next iteration. And so it's going to now be, so now for our next iteration, it's going to return our accumulator, which is now equal to 1. plus our current item, which is 2. And that returns 3. So now we're going to pass 3 into our next iteration. And so now we're going to return our accumulator, which is now equal to 3, because that's what we that's what we got from our previous iteration. So now it's 3 plus our current item, which is 3. That returns 6. So we're going to pass 6 down to the next iteration. And so now we're going to do the accumulator, which is now 6 plus our current item, 4, which is equal to 10, and so on. So, and once we finish this whole, going through this whole array, our final value will be equal to 15. And so as you can see, yeah, so that's basically how the reduce method works. I'll just run it here for you real quick. Console.log sum, and we get 15. Alright, so let's say we did not pass in an initial value. Let's say we just did it like that. What would our result be? Alright, it's still 15, but what's changed? So there's actually a change that happened. So if we don't pass an initial value here as our second argument for our reduce method, what happens here, I'll just show you in the diagram. So if we don't have an initial value here, what's going to happen is the initial value will now be equal to the first element inside our array. So now our first element will be our initial value because we didn't pass an initial value to begin with. And so then in our first iteration, what's going to happen is we're actually not going to start with 1. We're not going to do our initial value 1 plus 1. Since we didn't pass an initial value, that first part. So what's going to happen is our initial value is going to be 1 since we didn't pass an initial value to begin with. So now we're just going to pass in 1, and our current item is actually going to equal to our second element in our array. So to begin with, it's going to do return 1, which is our initial value, plus our current item, which is 2. So that's how we're going to start off things. And then from that we will get 3, so 3 plus 3, and so on. So we'll get the same result. But that's the main difference, is that if we don't pass in initial value to begin with, our accumulator will actually be equal to our first element inside our array, and the current item will be equal to 2. So when we start things off, it'll actually be 1 plus 2. And yep, so that is how the reduce method works. Sorry if that example was a little bit longer than it needed to be. I just wanted to really break it down for you guys, and hopefully it made sense for you. Maybe it was broken down too much, who knows. But if you guys like this video, give it a like. I would greatly appreciate it. And if you want to see more videos like this, please don't forget to subscribe. And yep, so have a good day.